I'll never forget the night those police lights splashed red and blue across the pine trees, painting the whole lake like a crime scene. My hands were shaking as I stood on the porch of my own cabin while Karen, the president of our HOA, screamed that I was trespassing. And then the cop read the deed out loud. And it said, not only was this cabin mine, so was hers. That was the night she cried. But you need to hear how we got there, because the road to that moment nearly broke me. Act 1. The conflict begins. When my uncle passed, I inherited a cabin I didn't even know existed. My name's Jennifer Collins, 46, a widow, a high school teacher, and that cabin felt like peace after years of noise and loss. Quiet lake water, tall pines, a wooden dock stretching out like a postcard. For the first time since my husband died, I thought maybe I could breathe again. But peace doesn't last long when there's an HOA run by a woman like Karen Whitfield. Picture her, pastel cardigan, pearl earrings, blonde bob so stiff it could cut glass, always clutching a clipboard like it was a badge. On my very first visit, she marched up without even saying hello. "You can't park there," she barked, pointing at the gravel patch right next to the cabin. Then, "These railings are the wrong color." Page 14 of the rulebook. That was my welcome committee. I tried to play nice. I waved. I baked cookies for the HOA meeting. She sniffed them and told me sugar was bad for the neighborhood kids. Every week, something new. Mailbox too tall. Porch light too bright. A dog barking too loud, except I didn't even own a dog. Neighbors mostly avoided her, eyes glazed over whenever she lectured them. But me, I was new, which meant I was her favorite target. Then came the letter, bright red letters slapped on my door. Notice of violation. Apparently, I had constructed an unauthorized structure. When I called the HOA number, Karen answered, "Sweet as poison." "Oh. That dock at the edge of your lot. It extends 3 feet into HOA water rights. You'll need to pay a fine and remove it." I laughed. "Karen, that dock's been here since the 60s. My uncle built it before the HOA even existed. Rules are rules," she said and hung up. That phrase became her gospel, and every time she muttered it, I felt my blood pressure climb me. Still, I told myself ignore her, keep the peace. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about control. Act 2. Escalation and turning point. Karen started showing up unannounced, snapping photos of my porch like it was a crime scene. One evening, I caught her kneeling in my marigolds, stretching a tape measure across my flower bed. "Karen, what are you doing?" I asked, bags of groceries still in my hands. "Checking property lines," she said flatly. "On my property." She sniffed. "HOA guidelines allow inspections. Pretty sure they don't allow trespassing." That was the day I stopped laughing it off. But it only got worse. Letters, threats of fines, notes about noise complaints, because I dared to laugh with friends on the porch. Then, one night, I overheard her telling her husband, "Frank, she doesn't belong here. We'll make her leave." And here's the part I hate admitting. It worked. For a while, I started second-guessing everything. Was I the problem? Maybe I wasn't cut out for this place. Maybe selling the cabin and walking away was easier. I'd lost my husband, my peace. I couldn't stand the thought of losing this, too. That was my lowest point. Standing in my kitchen, staring at yet another violation notice, wondering if I should just give her what she wanted. But fate had other plans. I went to the county office to pull property records just so I could fight back with facts. The clerk handed me an envelope. Inside, I found not one deed, but 2. Turns out, my uncle had owned multiple parcels, and through some legal twist, the land under Karen's cabin had never actually transferred fully, which meant technically, legally, it belonged to me. I nearly dropped the papers right there on the counter. I didn't rush to tell her. I hired a lawyer, checked the records twice, 3 times. It was airtight. Karen had no idea that while she was threatening me with fines, the ground under her house was literally mine. Then came the night she called the cops. I'd been gone for 2 days visiting my sister. I came home to flashing lights. Karen shrieking that I was squatting illegally. Neighbors peeked from porches like it was free entertainment. The officers asked for proof. Karen smirked, waving at her cabin like that proved anything. "We've lived here 10 years. Of course it's ours." That's when I handed the officer the deed. He read it slowly, then announced, "Both properties belong to her." Karen's face drained of color. "You're lying." "That's fake." But it wasn't. The officer shook his head. County seal, notarized, valid, and right there, in front of everyone. Karen burst into tears. It should have ended there. But people like Karen, they don't quit. They double down. Within days, she called an emergency HOA meeting. She proposed tripling fines, banning gatherings of more than 4 people, even imposing a curfew for porch use after 10 p.m. Mao. And get this, she demanded a no-contact order against me for her safety. And then came the storm. One night, long after dark, I heard engines outside, a flatbed truck, a concrete mixer, men in work vests carrying a jackhammer. The clipboard guy raised his voice over the thunder emergency order from the HOA. We're here to demolish the dock, my uncle's dock, the one that had stood for 60 years. Rain slammed down as the jackhammer bit into the wood. Splinters flew. The sound echoed like screams. I ran out barefoot in the mud. Stop. You can't do this. Karen appeared under a massive black umbrella. Frank trailing behind her, head down. Her voice was ice. Proceed. Neighbors spilled out of their homes, Bill in pajamas. Marcy, clutching an umbrella, turned inside out. Mrs. Thompson leaning on her cane, shouting, "This is illegal." Karen. Even Dave stormed over, yelling, "You call this safety? Lady, you've lost your mind." The jackhammer roared again. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the deed, marched through the rain, held it high. This says it's my land. One more board, and I call the sheriff. Trespassing. Property damage. You'll answer for every nail you pull out. Lightning lit the sky behind me like a stage spotlight. For a moment, everything froze. The workers exchanged looks. One finally shut off the jackhammer. "Not worth it," he muttered. "We don't swing hammers where cops might show up." They packed up and left. Karen screamed at them to finish the job. Nobody listened. Her power cracked in that storm, but she wasn't done. Act 3. Climax and justice. The next morning, a notice appeared on my door. 72 hours to vacate. And she was escalating to eviction. At the HOA meeting, Karen rattled off my violations. She even accused Mrs. Thompson of bribery for bringing me pie. The crowd actually laughed. I stood up, voice shaking but steady enough. "This cabin is mine. Legally, the land under your president's house also mine. You can vote all night, but you can't evict someone from property they own." The room murmured. Bill shouted support. Dave backed me up. Mrs. Thompson stood with her cane and said what everyone was thinking. "The only threat here is your ego, Karen." And then Frank, her own husband, finally spoke. Quiet, but firm. "No, Karen, this is wrong." The gasp in that hall could have cracked the ceiling. Karen slammed her gavel so hard it broke in her hand. She stormed out. But the momentum had shifted. Neighbors whispered about dissolving the HOA. A recall vote started circulating, so Karen went nuclear. She filed a lawsuit against me, defamation, harassment, emotional distress. We ended up in court. Her with boxes of evidence, me with one deed and a lawyer who didn't flinch. The judge read the deed, looked at her, and said flatly, "Mrs. Whitfield, this document shows you don't own the land your house sits on. Were you aware of that?" Her face went white as chalk. She stammered. The judge warned her any further harassment would put her in contempt. Still, she tried one last stunt. Hired movers to clear out my belongings. But the sheriff himself showed up, folded the so-called HOA order into his pocket, and said, "This isn't worth the paper it's printed on. This is harassment, and it ends tonight." Neighbors clapped. Movers walked away. And for the first time, I saw fear in Karen's eyes. The next morning, bulldozers appeared at the edge of the neighborhood. Karen waving fake blueprints, claiming a road-widening project. But when the sheriff confronted her, it all fell apart. No permits, no signatures, no authority. The crowd jeered. Someone shouted, "Recall vote." And just like that, the power she'd clung to so tightly slipped through her fingers. Even her loyal board members turned against her. Karen Whitfield, the woman who ruled this neighborhood like a queen, stood alone in the mud. Neighbors signing a petition to strip her crown. And I just held on to that soggy deed, watching the storm finally break. Final line lesson. Bullies can build walls, but the truth tears them down.